Hello and welcome to the DVD Graveyard. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at Aliens from 1986, directed by James Cameron. And honestly, James Cameron is probably the biggest director I've had on this show so far. I mean, I say had him on like I have him as a guest or something. He's probably, out of all the films I've talked about, he's probably done the most. Some of the biggest films that I've talked about so far. Because James Cameron went on to just have this huge, massive career in filmmaking, and he started from some very kind of humble beginnings, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But I've talked about a lot of films, but definitely James Cameron is probably the most popular director or the biggest name in the industry that I've spoken about so far. And honestly, this is probably the first film I've talked about that's really not a horror film. Like I love horror movies. I feel like horror is so broad, and you can have sci-fi horror, horror comedy, horror romance, or action horror. There's so much that you can do with horror that you really can't do with a lot of other genres. And this movie is kind of a good case in point for that, because this one to me is more of an action film than it is truly a horror film. That's kind of how I've looked at it. It's a sci-fi action film with horror elements, and that's the way that I've looked at this always. But so like I said, this movie was came out in 1986, so that's 7 years after the first Alien, if I'm doing my math correctly. I wasn't the best at math in school, but anyway, so yeah, about 7 years after. And it had kind of this was kind of that time when they took time to make sequels and get a sequel out instead of just pumping out a sequel, the next year, which isn't always a bad thing, depending on the franchise you're talking about. And James Cameron worked on this at the same time he was working on the scripts for two other films. I can't even remember what. I know one of them was Rambo 2. He was doing the script for that one at the same time. And this is actually his third film. And, his first film, of course, is the great Piranha 2, The Spawning, which I love that movie. I can't wait to talk about it. I love the first Piranha, and I love the second one. But that was Cameron's first film. And then, of course, he would do a little film called The Terminator right after that. And in 1984, and I think that might have been the script he was working on while he was doing the Rambo 2 script as well, because that came out in 85, and I know, like I said, he was working on those simultaneously. And Terminator ended up blowing up into this big success, and then of course James Cameron was able to do Aliens. And I'm not going to get into the actual production of this film, because there's a lot that goes into it. I know that he kind of based his screenplay off of an idea given to him from David Giler and Walter Hill, and of course he built on the elements done by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. I forgot to mention Ronald Shusett last time in my Alien video, and someone called me out on that in the comments, so I actually appreciate that, because I did forget about him. I usually do these things completely unscripted, so if I ever forget somebody or something like that, I do apologize. Feel free to add that in the comments anytime you'd like. But anyway, like I said, this movie, I highly recommend. Again, I have the Alien Quadrilogy, box set, the DVD one, and it's packed with special features. So I definitely recommend watching the special features for Aliens, because there is just so much that went into this movie. I mean, just a lot. I mean, there was a lot of, production issues. They had to, I think James Horner is the one who did the score. He had to rush through, and I think he only had 3 weeks to actually compose the score for this film. And of course, it's become one of the most iconic scores of all time. And they didn't really like it whenever they first, when they first heard it. I think James Cameron didn't really care for it too much whenever he heard the finished product, but it's become so iconic, and I mean it's used in Alien films, pieces of it even to this day. So I mean they really kind of captured lightning in a bottle with this. especially with them being on such a tight schedule. And one thing I love about this movie, this is not only the best sequel to Alien, to the first Alien film, and surpasses it, to some people. And honestly, some days I agree. I mean, I think that this surpasses the first Alien film, but I think it's a different type of movie. Some days if you ask me, I'll say Aliens is better. Some days I'll say that I prefer Alien, but they are definitely the top two of the franchise, most definitely. But one thing I can say about this is not only the best sequel to the first film, it's one of the best sequels of all time, in my personal opinion. I mean, it does so much for the lore behind Alien, the creatures. Even to this day, a lot of the stuff that was established for the creatures, the xenomorphs, is still used to this day. A lot of like the kind of hive mind, almost bug aesthetic that they have, comes from this film. The idea of the Queen kind of comes from this film. The factions, the world is just built even larger. The universe feels even larger, and it doesn't take away anything from the first movie. And I honestly think that you could watch this one on its own and not really, not really have to, and you're not really missing a lot from the first movie. I think it is a great sequel and great companion piece, but I think it also stands on its own very well. So that's kind of me just gushing over this movie. And again, I'm going to talk about it just a little bit. I'm not going to dive too deeply into this because I'm sure everyone's seen this film and there's just a lot to talk about. And if you get the chance, this is another thing I want to say is if you can watch the special edition of this one, it's the way to watch it. If you can get a hold of it, which it's pretty easy to watch. I think that's the version that's on all the streaming services. Because again, that is just the definitive version of the film. Highly recommend that. So this film, like I said, it builds on the world more. We have a much larger cast this time. I'm not going to mention everybody because the cast is so large. I'm just going to hit some of the standout people. So if I miss anybody, if I miss your favorite, I apologize. So, of course, Sigourney Weaver does return as Ellen Ripley in this. Carrie Henn plays Newt. She's great in this movie, and she's also her scream just pierces my brain. So she's a really good part in this movie, and she's one of the negative aspects of this movie, but that's just me. Of course, Bill Paxton is in this movie. Bill Paxton's been in so much shit. Yeah, I'm surprised I don't think I've even talked about anything with Bill Paxton in it yet. And of course, Lance Henriksen plays Bishop. Lance Henriksen plays Bishop, by the way. Michael Biehn, plays Hicks, who was originally supposed to be James Remar was actually supposed to be in this role, and I'll mention something about that in just a minute. But he was recast. Michael Biehn was cast in this role at kind of the last minute, which, like I said, I'll kind of mention some more of that. And Paul Reiser is in this movie, among others. I mean, this film has such a large cast. And such a really good cast too. I mean, everyone is just acting their asses off and doing such a great job. And one thing I really like, speaking of this, is this movie is the one where we are introduced to the Colonial Marines. So again, it just makes the world feel much larger. And I like the fact that the Colonial Marines, or all the actors who are playing the Marines, they spent a lot of time together before the shooting of the film. So they have this really kind of close bond, that can't really be faked. They spent just a lot of time in the training camp together. And of course, they did all that with James Remar, I believe. So whenever he had to be replaced by Michael Biehn, he did not really have that camaraderie with the rest of them like they do. He really feels like an outcast in this role, but it definitely works for his character. I mean, that's not really a problem, necessarily. I think Michael Biehn does a great job, and honestly, I can't really picture anybody else in this role. I mean, I really like James Remar. He was great in the Warriors. That's the one thing that I know him from. That's the first thing I think of whenever I think of James Remar is from the Warriors. Again, that little Walter Hill connection in there, on this film. But again, stellar cast. Everyone is just doing a fantastic job, and I love the Colonial Marines. They're so badass. They're great, and I love that kind of addition to this. And they are definitely a force to be reckoned with. with, and they're a great thing to kind of pit against the xenomorph threat. And speaking of the xenomorphs, they are designed quite differently in this film. I mean, of course, the basic kind of design is pretty much the same. I mean, they're built the same way, but they look a little bit different, and that is due to So apparently, from what I understand, behind the scenes, James Cameron's I believe it was James Cameron that said this, but in the first film, the xenomorph had this kind of glass dome thing over its head, its carapace, if you will, and he took that off because, of course, he didn't want to risk that being broken during the shooting, because there was going to be so many of these aliens, and they're going to have a lot more action set pieces in this rather than the slow kind of horror of the first movie. So he took that off, and of course he kind of added that to the lore. Whereas, after a certain time, maybe that shell piece, kind of dries up and falls off, once the underside of the carapace hardens. So the xenomorphs do have this different look. They kind of have the ridged kind of design on their carapace, which looks really cool. And I believe that has now become, once we've kind of gotten into the fact that the xenomorphs are kind of like insects now, kind of like bees in a way. Like they have different what's the word for it? They're kind of like, a army in of themselves. So they'd have different ranks, basically. So these ones that we get, the one that we got in the first movie was basically a drone, from what I understand. They have the smooth carapace. They're a lot stealthier. They kind of bring the, they're more like capturing the prey and bringing it back to be cocooned. Whereas the ones in this film are the warriors, and they are more aggressive, more fierce. They're better in combat. They're more armored. For fighting and defending the actual nest. So I really like that little bit of lore was added in there. And of course, if you really get into it, I mean, there's so many different variants of xenomorph, nowadays, I mean, even into the next film, which we'll talk about that when we get there. There are so many. Just this movie did so much for the series. And like I said, it made everything larger than life. It made everything just feel so well and integrated so well into the first movie that, I mean, it really feels like another part of the first film. And that's one thing I love about this movie, is it takes liberties where it needs to and does what it needs to, but it really kind of sticks with that original kind of lore, and it doesn't change it too much. So the plot of this film, basically Ripley, from the escape pod in the last film, she has been drifting basically through space, in cryosleep for, I believe, 57 years is what they say. And she is picked up by a salvage crew, basically, who finds the abandoned, what they assume to be abandoned, ship, or escape pod, or whatever you want to call it. And they find her, and they bring her back, and she is thawed out, and she meets Burke, played by Paul Reiser, who basically, kind of breaks the news to her, and then, of course, she finds out that her daughter has passed away, basically lived a full life while she's been asleep, and this is something that was added to the special edition that I think that you really need, because it makes the connection with Newt a little bit later a lot more impactful, really and truly. That's the way that's what I think anyway. So I think that this was a necessary addition to kind of learn about Ripley's daughter. That's something that I really appreciated. So pretty much the company, Weyland-Yutani, they're trying to kind of find out what's going on. They're talking to her, and she tells them what has happened, and really all they care about is the assets, and the ship has been destroyed, and she has to kind of she's trying to explain it, and Sigourney Weaver is like so badass in this movie, and just, I love the line where she's, did IQ suddenly drop while I was away? Just little lines like that. This movie is also super quotable, by the way. I won't even get into that, but I love that she's explaining this to them, and they don't really believe her, and of course she tells them to check out LV 426, to go and see this, and they'll find the ship, and they'll find the eggs, and just telling them, if one of these creatures managed to wipe out my entire crew, it's not good. It's not good. So they tell her that LV-426 has been colonized for several years now, by terraformers, and people have been living there. So of course, they lose contact with the colony on LV-426, and this is kind of where we're introduced to Newt fairly early. I think this is another part of it that was cut out, in the theatrical cut. But basically, we meet Newt early on, and her parents kind of stumble upon the ship, and the derelict ship, and a face hugger is seen on her father, and then of course the colony kind of goes dark. Nobody's heard anything, and so Burke, is tasked to send the Colonial Marines are tasked to go investigate the colony, and Burke wants Ripley to go as a consultant, to kind of go with them and tell their experience, of course, because she's been there and she knows what this creature is potentially. And she doesn't want to go at first, and she finally decides to do it and to go with them. And I love the part where they're kind of briefing the Marines on kind of what's going on, and she's kind of telling them about it. And the Marines are not taking her seriously. They're just kind of laughing this off. It's just another bug hunt. And little lines like that too also just kind of make you think, like, what other creatures are these guys facing? You know what I mean? Like, what are these guys for exactly? And again, it's that little bit of world building that goes so far for this movie. And just makes this universe feel even larger. Like, I love stuff like that. And this movie does it so well. We get to the colony, which is Hadley's Hope is the name of it, I believe. And when they get there, it's quiet and everyone is missing. And this is a scene that I love too, is just also another thing is just how, tight and how much of a real kind of military unit that these, I was not in the military, but just the way that the Marines feel is so awesome, and it's so believable. But this is a great just opening part when we actually get to the colony, and it's raining and windy, and there's a storm coming in, and the colony appears to be abandoned, and it's just quiet. And I love this whole part of the movie. Like, I don't know, it's just got this really, and this whole movie kind of does, like, even though it's a horror action sci-fi film, it has this really cozy kind of comfortable atmosphere to it. I don't know what it is about this. Maybe it's nostalgia, talking here, but this movie to me just has this kind of cozy feel to it, and this really nice vibe to it that I love. Like, this movie is kind of like a warm blanket for me. I would definitely consider it to be one of my cozy films. So I love that whenever they go there, and of course they're kind of moving around, and we're getting the really kind of spooky, thing with the motion tracker. Like, I love that beeping, of the motion tracker, and how they kind of use that later on in the movie. I love that. And they find out that all the colonists are kind of confined to this one area, and they go and investigate it, and they send the Marines down there. And of course the Marines, they're, because of where they are, I believe they're positioned underneath a reactor or something like that, so they can't use any actual, they can't use their guns because of the type of bullets that their pulse rifles fire, which is really also another really cool addition to this. Their weapons are so badass. I love the pulse rifles. I think that's so cool. But they can't use them. And so they collect all the magazines, so everyone is kind of disarmed. And when they get down into this place with the reactor, of course it's hot and humid, and we see all the gross kind of alien shit down there. And this is another thing that's really cool that I like about the design of the xenomorphs, is they blend in so well with the environment, and this kind of, again, very Giger inspired because they still used all of H.R. Giger's designs. He didn't work on this film because he was working on a different film at the time, but they used a lot of his design and stuff. I'm sure to his they had his blessing on this, but it looks so cool and it's so spooky, and they are attacked, and it's a great scene, because all the Marines are wearing these like cameras on their helmets, and it's just a really cool just to kind of see this. It's almost like very early sort of found footage in a way. The way that this is done, and I just think it's really cool. I like that whole kind of the lo-fi kind of look that the cameras have, and it's just it's really great. And a lot of them are killed and picked off by the xenomorphs when they're attacked, and of course they don't have their weapons, so they're kind of screwed, and they're taken out of there, and they've lost a good portion of the squad, and now they know kind of what they're up against. And they're like, Bill Paxton is great. He's like, we just got our asses handed to us, So like, I like that the Marines are really badass, and I like that the aliens are still really badass. Now they do make them a little bit sort of, I hear some people say that the aliens are kind of a pushover in this film, but I think it's just because the Marines are such badasses and they have these badass weapons to deal with the xenomorphs this time around. But even still, like, the xenomorphs are destroying them, and they're not facing just one this time, because I do love that classic one xenomorph is kind of your main antagonist, but this time, they're facing an army of xenomorphs, so I think that's really cool, and of course, I say army of xenomorphs. I think there was actually only 12 xenomorphs in total, played by I think gymnasts and dancers and stuff like that, so they could really get the kind of very limber kind of performance out of them. Well, first they decide to leave. They decide that they're going to get out of here and nuke the entire site from orbit, but before they can leave, the ship that's coming to pick them up crashes because the xenomorph has gotten on board. And so the xenomorphs are like cockroaches. They're getting into everything, and just wrecking the place. And so once that is destroyed, they the rest of the squad and Ripley and Newt at this point, because they've found her again hiding in the air ducts and stuff. And they all hunker down, set up these sentries, and basically wait it out, and they are waiting for a rescue team, but they find out that the reactor is basically going to explode, unless they so they have to do something. And of course, like, the movie, like I said, kind of goes on. They're kind of having this kind of siege with the xenomorphs. They find out that these xenomorphs are using, there's an access, like a tunnel that goes back and forth between the facilities. Bishop ends up having to crawl through it, and of course, and this is one thing too I want to mention while I'm on it, because like I said earlier, they're facing kind of an army of xenomorphs. Is you really don't see a lot of the xenomorphs in this. There's really not a lot, realistically. Like, when you go back and watch it, like, you feel like they're, you see them all the time, but you really don't see them as much as, like, I remember, when upon a rewatch of this. So anyway, they have this kind of one final stand when they find out that the xenomorphs are in the air vents, basically, and they have theorized this whole time that there is a queen, and basically the squad is wiped out except for Hicks and Sigourney Weaver and Newt, and Lance Henriksen, is able to remotely pilot this escape ship, and that is when, whenever they're trying to escape, Newt is taken by one of the xenomorphs. She's taken back to the hive, or the nest, or whatever you want to call it. And so instead of leaving right away, this is a great kind of character moment for Ripley. And again, I think this is why you need that scene with her finding out her daughter has passed away. It really, she can't abandon Newt. So Ripley decides to take a pulse rifle and a flamethrower, and basically duct tapes them together, and she goes back into the compound to find Newt. And this is what I was talking about in my first video, or my first review for the first Alien, is, it took kind of the final girl sort of approach, and it turned her into a badass. Like, I know that this was one thing that, is really great about this movie, is it Sigourney Weaver is kind of just the top final girl, of all time, because she goes in there like a bad motherfucker with these guns, and she's blasting xenomorphs, and she finally makes it to the nest, and she finds Newt. And this is where we are introduced to the Xenomorph Queen, and the Queen is fucking terrifying, like and awesome. Like, she's massive, and it was all animatronic. I mean, and it was done so well. I believe it was built by Stan Winston, if I'm not mistaken, or at least he worked on this movie, and a lot of it was done at Stan Winston Studios. Again, look into the design of the Xenomorph Queen. I mean, so much went into that effect, and it's done so well. I think it's a combination of miniatures and animatronic work, and it's so well. She's basically done so well, and she's basically just a giant puppet. And when I say giant, I mean she's fucking massive. Like, I mean the Xenomorph Queen is huge and very intimidating. Ripley, before she leaves, and she, like I said, she rescues Newt, and the eggs start to open. And the Queen kind of rips off of her egg sac thing that she's on, where she's just been laying these eggs like a machine, and she chases Ripley down. And Ripley and Newt are able to get back up and get back to the ship, where they think that Bishop has left them. And of course, she's been very weary of Bishop the entire movie since she found out he was an android, because of course what Ash did, on the last ship. But of course, Bishop proves her wrong on the surface. Bishop does come back for them. Hicks probably made him come back. They get on the ship and they leave, and then of course the site is blown up, by this reactor failing. So when they get back to the main ship of the Colonial Marines, the Sulaco, they get back to the main ship, and when they're on there, everything is perfectly fine. They think everything's going to be okay, but it's not, because the alien Queen has somehow snuck her way onto the Sulaco with them. She was on the kind of drop ship thing, and they have this final showdown, and we get to Bishop is ripped in half, by her, and we get this excellent, the most badass line. Sigourney Weaver comes out and, get away from her, you bitch, because she's trying to kill Newt, the Queen is. And again, this part is genuinely terrifying. Like, the Xenomorph Queen has always kind of scared the shit out of me, because she's just so big and freaky, and she has this huge kind of carapace on her, and just super cool. And Ripley gets in the power loader, and she fights the Xenomorph Queen, and much like the first film, she knocks the Queen into the airlock and opens the airlock, and the Queen is sent out into space and is done. And she's defeated her. They go into the ship, into the cryo, the kind of cryo tubes, and they go into hypersleep again, much like the first movie, which is nice, because I like how this movie really kind of bookends with the first film. I really like when stuff like that, whenever you have stuff like that. So that is Aliens. Again, much bigger and better, if you want to say, than the first film. I really like this movie a lot. Everything is done so much, just so well. And I meant to mention this earlier, like about the face hugger scene. Another scene that really scares the shit out of me, or used to scare the absolute shit out of me in this movie, is the scene with the face hugger when Burke, we find out that Burke is actually a piece of shit, and he locks Ripley Ripley and Newt in this room with with some face huggers, and the face huggers actually get a whole scene of their own in this movie, versus just the one little quick shot we get of them in the first film. So that's something I really like, and that is another kind of horror scene in this film. I can't recommend this movie enough. Such a great sequel. I can't imagine actually seeing this whenever it released. I'm sure it was huge, and it's inspired, even at the time, so many video games. It changed so much stuff from the lore. Speaking of video games, I actually do really like the Aliens Colonial Marines game. I know that a lot of people shit on that game, but I have a lot of fond memories playing that game. It wasn't perfect, but I do enjoy it, along with the Alien versus Predator game from, I think, 2010 is when that came out. Like, God, that game is freaking old now. Holy shit. I remember when that came out. But I still have Colonial Marines, and I still do enjoy playing it every once in a while on 360. Like I said, this just added so much to the story. It made the universe feel even larger. This movie had a much larger budget, and like I said, it blew up in the box office. Like, this movie made so much damn money. And like I said, James Cameron not only made the best Alien sequel, but he made one of the best sci-fi horror sequels of all time. You could actually say, he made two of the greatest sequels of all time with this and Terminator 2, because Terminator 2 is an excellent sequel as well. Love the Terminator films. So that is Aliens. Like I said, I apologize if I missed something, but there is so much that goes into the making of pretty much all of these films, but especially Aliens. Like, there was so much that goes into this. I have a full-time job, and like I said, these are not scripted. I literally am just kind of talking, about stuff that I remember off the top of my head. If I had more time and the resources, I would absolutely do more research on this. So if I did forget something, I do apologize. I try to talk about it as much as I can remember, and I really just am here to appreciate the movie and talk about my personal experience with the movie and how much I love the movie. That's really why I do this. I just do it for fun. I don't really do it for anything else. So if I did forget anything, or if you do want to mention anything, please put it in the comments below. I do like reading over the comments. There's a lot of people who know this stuff a lot better than I do. So please, do not hesitate to leave a comment below and throw some of the facts in there, because, again, there is a lot that went into the making of this movie. So I'm glad I got to talk about this and the first film. I look forward to talking about the third one as well, because I really like the third one too. Of course, it's nowhere near as great as this film, but it is still a fun time, and I do enjoy it. And then, of course, we will talk about Resurrection when we get there. And then, I can't wait to talk about the rest of them, as well as the Predator franchise. I'd like to get into those at some point too, because kind of been on a little bit of a Predator and Alien binge recently. So anyway, I'll stop my rambling now. I hope you enjoyed this review. Until next time, stay tuned for the next review. And as always, have a great night and goodbye.